Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, I want to talk to you about something that I hear often in my community, and that is your child rejecting an OCD diagnosis or rejecting that something is OCD. And that's hard because as parents, we want to help our kids. And sometimes the first and strongest barrier is just their outright denial that they even have any issues at all. And that can stop us in the tracks. And sometimes as parents, we don't know where to go with that. Because if our child denies that they even have an issue, how do we start working on it? We're going to talk about that today, but before I get started, I do want to thank OCD for sponsoring this episode. OCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and they're available in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. You can schedule your free 15-minute consultation to see if OCD is a right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That is treatmyocd.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. So let's talk about this idea of our kids rejecting their OCD diagnosis and what to do about it as parents. The first thing that I want to mention is it's really important that you got assessed by an OCD specialist. So we want to start with the fact that hopefully the diagnosis is accurate. More often than not, kids are being misdiagnosed with other disorders when it is actually OCD, or OCD is being missed. So it's pretty rare for OCD to be diagnosed inaccurately, but you want to make sure that you have a therapist or whoever's assessing them has the credentials and the expertise to make an OCD diagnosis, because we don't want to just instantly think our kids are wrong if our kids feel like it's not OCD. They might have a lot of education and know something that we don't. More often than not, OCD is missed. But I do think we want to preface that with exploring why our child feels like that the OCD diagnosis is inaccurate. I think it's important to make sure that whoever is assessing them has the credentials, and if not, to go and get a second opinion or to get them assessed by an OCD specialist that does this for a living and has gotten the extra training to diagnose, assess, and treat OCD, because a lot of therapists out there do not have that specialized training to treat OCD. And so going to the International OCD Foundation, looking at their provider directory at iocdf.org/find-help, or going to NoCD, who does virtual assessments at treatmyocd.com. Those are a good place to start. But most of you who are listening have already gone through that battle of finding the right provider, finding the right help, and finally getting that diagnosis. And then your child is like, nope, it's not OCD. Those are the parents that I want to talk to, because that's what I'm seeing in my community more often is a parent who's very educated, who's taken the time to educate themselves on what OCD is, to find that specialized provider to assess their child, and going through all those hoops, and then finally getting the answers that they need, knowing what they need to do to help their child, and their child is then rejecting the OCD diagnosis or rejecting that it is OCD. And then what are you supposed to do with that? So in the first half of this episode, I want to talk about the why of why would a child reject an OCD diagnosis. And then after the break, I want to talk about what are we going to do about that? What are some steps you can take as parents? I think we have to start with the why, because if you don't understand what's driving that rejection, it's very hard to address it, because like everything else that I ever talk about, it's not a one-stop shop that you can approach an issue no matter what is causing it. I guess that seems obvious, but I think a lot of times parents want solutions for something And there's so many variables of like, well, what's driving that behavior? Sometimes parents will say, my child's doing this compulsion. What do I do to make it stop? And it's like, well, what is their core fear? What is their OCD theme? What's driving it? Like there's so many variables that go into it that it's not always a quick answer that is that fits every situation and every scenario. And this is the same thing. A lot of times parents will ask me, my child's rejecting the OCD diagnosis. Now what do I do? Well, why are they rejecting it? What's causing them to reject it? We have to start with that because that will be different for each child. And so some kids may reject the diagnosis altogether and may always be like, it's not OCD. It's never been OCD. I don't have OCD. And there's other kids that may have initially been open to the idea of working on their OCD and maybe even acknowledge that it was OCD, but somewhere along the lines decided that they were no longer going to engage in treatment and have stopped acknowledging that it's OCD. So each one of you might be in a different situation because that does happen quite often where kids were on board initially and then put the brakes on. And then you have kids that were never on board and have always rejected the OCD diagnosis. And so that will look different in each family. So let's go through some of these so that we can figure out what it is for your child. The first one is a lack of understanding of what OCD is. A lot of times we have a stereotyped idea of OCD. And this happens with parents and other people as well, even mental health professionals, believe it or not, where they think that OCD is the stereotype of what is really perpetuated in the media, which is, I'm neurotically clean, or I line things up, or I'm really organized, and that's OCD. And so your child may think, I don't have OCD because I'm not hand washing, or I'm not neurotic, or I don't line things up. And so one of the reasons why an OCD diagnosis is rejected, and also by parents, to be honest, is because there's a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding of all the many different ways that OCD can show up. It wears many different disguises. You can have intrusive thoughts about so many different things, and your compulsions can be so different that they may not realize that confessing all their possible bad actions or the things that they think they may or may not have done in the past that were bad, that their constant confessing of those things is OCD, because they might think, oh, I'm not washing my hands. I'm just telling you all of these things that are going on in my head. And they may not realize that that's OCD. And that's just one example of a zillion where OCD shows up in a very different way. So the first why, as far as why kids reject an OCD diagnosis, is they don't understand OCD in all the many facets that it can show up. And so that's the first one. I'm going to go through lots of different ones, and your child might have some of these, several of these, or none of these. But we want to figure out the why first. The next one, which is really common, is it's embarrassing or it's shameful. They feel embarrassed or they feel a lot of shame to acknowledge that they have OCD. And this comes from lots of different things. It might be how mental health issues are viewed in your family. It might be how one parent is viewing these issues. A lot of times I see in the families I work with in my online community, AT parenting community, is, one parent doesn't get it and is pretty vocal about that. Not often, or not always, but sometimes there's a dynamic there where one parent, often the dad, to be honest, if we were just statistically look at it, where the dad says, there is no OCD, or they're manipulating you, or they're coddling you. Not that every dad says that at all, by far, but when it is a couple issue, it often tends to be in that direction. Obviously, there are outliers and exceptions to that rule, but that dynamic is often there when there are struggles between a couple, and a child can feel that, and so they might feel like it's not there's not a united front with the parents on the diagnosis. So there is that could be happening. It could be that in the family system in general, the extended family, a mental health issue is not accepted. And so that might be an issue. There could be embarrassment or shame just based on social media and how OCD is viewed. OCD is the butt of all jokes. And so do I really want to have OCD and be part of that joke, that people are making fun of me? So there can be embarrassment in there. There could be shame in, there's something wrong with me and I don't want a diagnosis. And that there is grief in getting a diagnosis of any sort, whether it's a mental health diagnosis, a medical diagnosis, there's a grief in that. And so that can be part of the embarrassment and shame. So there's lots of different things that can show up that can create that struggle. Another one is that they don't see it. They don't see the OCD issue as separate from them. This one is very common, that it's part of their personality. You're trying to take something away from them. You're rejecting a part of who I am. You're trying to change me. Now, more often than not, when I hear that or when I see that in the kids that I've worked with in my private practice, when my private practice was open, or in my online community, often those kids are autistic, where they cannot separate out the OCD from who they are. There is a lack of insight, and so they see it as part of their personality. So they hold on to it really tightly. So if your child is autistic, that might be part of the struggle in them rejecting the OCD diagnosis, is that there is often a lack of insight when it comes to that. If you're not sure, or you're like, well, there are some autistic traits there, I don't know, it might be worth getting an assessment for that as well. Not that we're trying to add another label, but that might help give you a better clinical perspective of what is going on with your child. If there's that rigidity of this is who I am, and stop trying to change me and take this away from me. The last one, and certainly this is not an exhaustive list, but this is just the most common ones that came to my mind when I decided to talk about this today, is the fear that if I accept this diagnosis, or if I admit to you that this is OCD, that you're going to force me to do hard things. You might force me to do therapy. You might force me to take medication. You're going to force me to fix this or do things that are scary to me. Therefore, I'm going to just reject the entire thing altogether and deny it. And so if I deny that there's a problem, you can't try to fix it, and then I'm safe. And so that is another really common one. I would say those are the 4 most common reasons why kids often reject an OCD diagnosis. So think about those. And there might be another one as well, for sure. But think about what resonates the most with what's going on with your child. Is there a lack of understanding of OCD? Maybe you don't understand OCD completely. Maybe they don't understand it completely. Is there embarrassment or shame that's going on based on just, the social media concept of OCD, or even what they're experiencing at home and how it's viewed between the parents or between the family in general? Do they see it as part of their personality? Are they autistic? And so there is no separation of my OCD versus who I am as a person. Or do they feel like you're going to force something on them, force them to do therapy, force them to take medication? That's often what we see when kids initially were on board and then they put the brakes on. Sometimes the pace in therapy or the things that they were encouraged to do were too much at once. And so they're in denial of like, I'm not even going to acknowledge this is my OCD because it was too hard for me to face it. And so that does happen as well. So after the break, we're going to talk about what do you do with all this? Where do you go from here? Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was desperately needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers, and so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I'm trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do the exposures. Before it was really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it, so it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com.
Welcome back. So before the break, we talked about understanding the why and why kids reject the OCD diagnosis, or why they might reject that something is their OCD for lots of different reasons. And some of those look very different than others. And so understanding what's driving your child's denial is really important. And then what do we do with that? If we understand, okay, yes, they're denying it and it's because they're embarrassed, or they're denying it because they see it as part of who they are. What do I do with all that? Well, let's go through them. It will differ depending on what is triggering the denial. So if they are rejecting the OCD diagnosis because they don't understand OCD, then our first step would be to educate. And it's really important that we pace ourselves really well when we're dealing with our kids, because if we become overzealous or we become kind of heavy-handed with the OCD diagnosis and we don't pace ourselves or navigate in a delicate way, we can really ruin the trust and we can shut down communication. And we don't want to ruin trust or shut down communication, because when we do that, we're not going to be able to partner with our child to help them. And really, OCD is an individual journey that our child has to navigate themselves. And as much as we want to help them, I always say this, we're only one piece of the puzzle. And we're not privy to all of the pieces. What we see with OCD is the tip of the iceberg typically. There's so much under the surface. No matter how articulate, communicative, or open your child is, we are always seeing the tip of the iceberg when it comes to OCD. We'll never see the full iceberg because we're never going to be privy to what's going inside our child's mind. And we will only see the overt compulsions, the ones that are obvious to everybody. There's always I don't want to say always, but there's often mental compulsions and things that are going on that are more subtle that we don't see. And there's themes that are either missed or just not spoken of. And that's okay. That is just part of the nature of OCD, is that we don't get to carry this for our kids. We can coach our kids, we can guide them, we can connect them to the right resources and support and education, but it's still their journey. We have our own unique journey as parents in how do we guide them? How do we help ourselves? How do we deal with our stress? How do we help them with their stress? How do we respond when we know we're talking to OCD or when we're doing things for OCD? These are all this is our journey, right? What we do as parents, and they have their journey, what they do. And so we can only do what we can do. And I always say that no matter what topic I'm talking about, because I think it's really important for us to recognize that we're only one piece of the puzzle. And so the first thing that we want to do is educate our child if they're having a lack of understanding of what OCD is, then our job would be to educate them. They may not want to learn about OCD. They might, shut you down. And so if we feel like they don't understand that their overwhelming feeling of disgust is an OCD theme, and we want them to watch YouTube videos on disgust OCD, then I might incentivize them. I might just only focus on education, and I might incentivize them in different ways to just watch YouTube videos or just read. In the AT parenting community, members will often reach out to me in our forums. Members can talk to me on our online forum and our member website. And a lot of times I'll say to moms or dads in the forums, you're in the education stage. We can't move to do exposures because your child's like rejecting that they even have OCD. We have to work on just incentivizing them to educate themselves. And the best way to educate kids who are putting their brake on and are like, I'm not working on this isn't OCD, is to help them watch videos or incentivize them to watch videos that are very specific about their current theme. Because sometimes we want to educate them on OCD, and that's the first step, but we're throwing a big book at them, or we want them to watch, a documentary or like a big movie or something that's very general, and we only have like a finite window with them where they're only going to allow us a little wiggle room. And so sometimes incentivizing them of, can you just watch this 5-minute video today? And you can earn blah, blah, blah. The incentives really have to be there, because if you're not getting traction and you're getting anger and rejection and hostility, then we want to change that dynamic. I want to incentivize and say, look, you don't have to watch this video, but I love you and I want to help you with your OCD. And we're just going to work on just educating you right now. You don't have to do anything, because sometimes disarming them can be really important. And if you want to watch this 5-minute video, you don't have to, but if you want to watch this 5-minute video, you can earn X, Y, and Z. I do have a whole podcast on how to incentivize in an appropriate way, because I do feel like when you are dealing with resistance, which if you're listening to this episode because this is happening in your house, you're dealing with resistance. And when you're dealing with resistance, incentives will be a key component to moving the dial. And so learning how to develop a good incentive plan and understanding what works and what doesn't, it will be your first step, probably. And so listening to episode 123, I have a podcast called Developing Good Incentives to Get Kids to Work on Anxiety or OCD. I would listen to that episode after this if you haven't heard it before, because I think that one will really help you. If you're ever looking for any of my episodes, the easiest way to look for them is to go to my website at atparentingsurvival.com. Scroll down all the way to the bottom, and at the bottom I have a search button, and it says looking for something specific, search, and there's a little search button. Type in incentive, and that podcast episode will pop up. That is definitely the easiest way to find any episodes that I recommend when I'm talking to you, because otherwise I think when you're on a podcast app, it can be a little overwhelming. So the first step would be, you can earn blah, blah, blah if you watch this short video. I like the attitude of saying things like, you don't have to. That works for my kids. I'll say things like, you don't have to watch this video. It's only 5 minutes, but you don't have to watch it. But if you do, you can earn blah, blah, blah. And then I'll leave it up to them. I'll be like, it's here on this, computer. If you want to, just let me know if you watch it, and then I can give you your points or whatever incentive plan you're developing. That could be really helpful. So members of like the AT parenting community, I will say to them, here's a video on disgust OCD, or here's a video on moral OCD. Have them watch that, because you only get this little window and you want it to like hit the nail on the head. You want them to watch this and be like, oh my gosh, that's like literally what I'm dealing with. She's talking to me. She's talking about me. I've had members where the child said things like, did you tell her to make that video? That's when you know you're hitting the nail on the head. And you want that because you want them to know that they are understood and they're not alone, and that there is a type of OCD that shows up in the way that their OCD is showing up. Because often part of the rejection is, this doesn't look like the stereotype of OCD, or everybody talks about OCD, but nobody has this particular problem. So we want to really validate their struggle and identify their particular theme. Themes do change, they morph and they shift. And so that's not where we're going to end, but that's where we're going to begin, because I want them to know that we get it and that they are not alone in that. So that's the first one, is educate. Find YouTube videos that are very specific. If you're part of the AT parenting community, message me in the forums and I will say, here are videos that are very specific to your particular child's theme. Normally, you have to give me a whole bunch of information before I can give you a video, because obviously I won't know anything about your child. But members will they'll give me detailed information about what the struggle is and how it's showing up. And then I'll be like, oh, they should watch this particular video, and that can help. If you're not part of the AT parenting community, you're not a member, you can get on the wait list at atparentingcommunity.com. But for those of you that are not part of our community, you can always go to my YouTube channel and search, or you can go to my website and search for your topic and see what pops up. The next one is dealing with the embarrassment and shame. And so if your child is feeling embarrassed or shamed about OCD, then we really want to validate that they're not alone. And so again, it can help to find videos that are very specific to their theme, because that helps validate, well, a whole YouTube video is made on this. You're definitely not alone. But also connecting them with other kids who have OCD. And so that might be through a support group, but I would say that most kids who are rejecting an OCD diagnosis are not ready for a support group. Sometimes we'll have AT parenting community members have their kids listen to our support group. We do support group calls once a month for kids, and we have one for teens, and we have one for parents. And sometimes they will say, you don't have to be on the phone call. It's a Zoom call. You don't have to be on the call, but you could just listen to it. So just sit here and draw, or sit here and pet the cat, do whatever you want. I could just have the Zoom call on, and you can just listen to it without your audio or video on. And that helps normalize that they're not alone without them having to participate. So that's one option that can actually be helpful. Another option is to have them watch things where kids are part of it, or they're talking about their OCD. So Unstuck, an OCD kids movie, is a very short documentary on OCD. And you can watch that at ocdkidsmovie.com. And you can rent it. It's not expensive at all. And they follow a handful of kids who have OCD. And hopefully one of those kids has your child's OCD theme, because that'd be even better. But no matter what, it helps normalize the experience of having OCD, and is a great way to educate them and validate that they're not alone. So that's another thing. Finding different ways to normalize OCD can be helpful. Turtles All the Way Down by John Green just came out pretty recently. It was a book forever ago, and I did read the book. I haven't watched the movie yet, but I'm going to. That might be a good one to validate that they're not alone. Some kids have watched the movie. I haven't seen it yet, and said that's not how my OCD shows up, and felt like that didn't validate them. And so maybe watch the movie first. I think OCD is OCD. So even if it shows up differently, it's still great that there's, a major motion picture that's talking about OCD. So to me, that's still really helping validate they're not alone. It might be getting books out about OCD to let them know they're not alone. There's all sorts of different ways. Maybe you find a support group and have them just listen to it, like I mentioned before. Watching YouTube videos of any sort. There are a lot of teens talking about OCD. If you just Google that on YouTube and find kids talking about OCD, that can really validate. Just watch these things before you show them to your child, just to make sure that they seem appropriate. But those can be really helpful ways. There's also famous people who have OCD, and I feel like that always really helps. If you Google literally the phrase famous people who have OCD, things pop up. OCD UK has a page of famous people with OCD. I'm just trying to look at some of these. There are a bunch, but some of them I think aren't as accurate as others. But if you Google it and then just look at the list, I think you'll find that there are a few here that are really good. There are a few good quality links over here. Just be careful and look at what you're Googling and what you're clicking on. But that will get you the most resources, is find someone famous. Ideally, do your own work and find someone that they know, whether it's a pop star, a singer, an actor, or an athlete that they know, because there are so many lists of people with OCD that you're bound to find somebody that resonates with your child. And that's really helpful to normalize it as well. You didn't even know that so-and-so has OCD. Some of them make videos. The Child Mind Institute does this campaign called Dare to Share. And if you go to childmind.org/dare to share, you will find that the video library of people who will share their mental health struggles. And I feel like that's really helpful too. There's a bunch of videos from famous people talking about their mental health struggles. So go through those maybe and see which ones would resonate with your children. Because I think the more we can validate and normalize their struggles, the better that they will, the more open they will be. I do have jet lag today. So I just got back from Japan last night. So I'm like barely stringing my sentences together. So bear with me today. I actually thought I was doing pretty good until then. I was like, I'm really impressed with myself, but my mind is very foggy right now. So hard to come back and be like 16 hours. Is it 16 hours behind where I was before? So I'm very disoriented, but I am surviving. The next one I wanted to touch on is when they see it as part of their personality. And so one of the ways that we get people to work on OCD is that they have insight, that they're able to say, I'm having this intrusive thought, but it's not aligned with who I am. And it's ego dystonic. That's like the fancy word that we use in the OCD world to say, like, this is ego dystonic. It's not, I'm not aligned. Sorry, I keep hitting my ring. I'm not aligned with this thought. I'm having an intrusive thought that says I want to hurt myself, but I don't want to hurt myself. I'm having an intrusive thought that says I am a bad person, and I'm not a bad person. It's not aligned. But when they can't see that separation, and often this is due to them being autistic. That's a very common struggle when we are dealing with a comorbid condition where the child's autistic and they have OCD, is that they can't separate out what is OCD versus who they are. And that is a big struggle. That becomes a big barrier in treatment. And so treatment does take longer often because there is this whole thing of first them seeing the OCD separate from themselves. And often that doesn't happen. So that becomes a tricky thing. So sometimes we have to start with, how is this behavior getting in the way of who you really are or who you want to be? And so sometimes doing some ACT work can help around this. So ACT stands for Acceptance Commitment Therapy, and it is the type of therapy that is often used to supplement ERP. And ERP is a type of cognitive behavioral therapy standing for Exposure Response Prevention. And ERP typically is the go-to therapy approach for pediatric OCD. But ACT, Acceptance Commitment Therapy, is a fantastic supplement that is often incorporated into the treatment for kids with OCD. And it might be that your child starts with ACT to engage them and get them to see how OCD gets in the way of who they are and gets in the way of what they value. Another thing that I've done with kids, with autistic kids in particular, is I've talked about the science of OCD, and that can be really helpful too. I do have a YouTube video that I made on my YouTube channel called Why Do Intrusive Thoughts Feel So Real? That talks about the science a bit, about the science behind OCD. And so that might be something that you show your child, and you can just go to my website, atparentingsurvival.com, and search that title, Why Do OCD Intrusive Thoughts Feel So Real? That will pop up. Or you can actually just use the keyword science. That's actually how I found this video myself, is I went to my website and I typed in science in my search button, and this one popped up because I wanted to find a video for you. I wanted to recommend a video that talked about the science behind OCD. If you're an AT Parenting community member, I do have a video for members on our member website, and you just have to go to the video section and then go to OCD videos, and I talk about the science behind ERP. So yeah, go to resources, under resources, go to short videos, under short videos, go to OCD videos. And it is called, it's labeled Kids Video, The Science Behind ERP. Or you could just go to the search button at the very top of the AT Parenting Community member website and just type in Science Behind ERP, and that video will pop up for you. And so that is a much more detailed video than the one on YouTube. I think it's about 15 minutes long, and it will go into the science behind ERP, and I go into much more detail about the filtering system, and I talk in a kid-friendly way, but I do talk about the science about how things get stuck. And so when parents ask me in the AT Parenting Community, when they talk about this thing about their child rejecting the OCD diagnosis, and sometimes when they are aligned with their OCD or they're not motivated, I will recommend that video, especially if they're autistic, because I do feel like sometimes understanding the science behind the brain in a kid-friendly way helps them to see how it is separate from them and it's not who they are, and that, they're a beautiful person and they have all these beautiful strengths, but getting stuck in washing your hands 50,000 times a day, or getting stuck in, avoiding all these places that are contaminated, is not part of who you are. It's not keeping you safe. And so sometimes we have to start with getting them to see how it's getting in the way, or getting them to see the science behind it. And that can be really helpful. Okay, the next reason why some kids reject OCD was because they think they'll be forced to do therapy or take medication. And so sometimes it's literally conveying that you are not going to make them do something they don't want to do, or take medication that they don't want to take, right? Giving them some agency, depending on their age, that things are going to go at their pace. I feel like it's really important to let our kids know that this is their journey. And although that can be a little overwhelming for our kids, one, it's reality, and two, it helps them own it. I mean, I'll often say to my kids with anxiety and OCD, I am not moving in with you. When you leave, you're going to pack up and you're going to take your OCD with you. And I love you, but this is your journey. Your OCD is coming with you, and it's something that you're going to learn to deal with your whole life. And I'm just here to support you. I can't fix this for you as much as I want to. And it's going to go with you wherever you go in this world. And so let me know how I can help you or support you, or connect you to people that can support and help you. But ultimately, this is going to be your journey. And sometimes we have to say to our kids, whether you accept or don't accept your OCD diagnosis, it's part of your story. It's part of who you are. And you can reject it, but it doesn't mean it's going away. And you can try to deny it, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to continue to grow. And I'm here to support you and love you and get you all the help you need. But if you want to put the brakes on and you don't want to deal with anything, I can't do anything about that, because it's your struggle, not mine. And so I can't override things. And I think that letting our kids know that this is really their battle is really important, because I think sometimes our kids think we're going to do all the hard work, or that we're the enemy, that the more we are trying to push for therapy or push for medication or push for them to do things to change, that this is our battle, not theirs, and that we're the enemy, not OCD. And really, we want them to see that we're aligned with them, that we are a partner and collaborating with them, and that we want to support them to crush their OCD, and that OCD is the problem, not us. And sometimes it takes some time. I do have a YouTube video on that. I have a YouTube video on every topic, but this might be a good one to show if you feel like your child sees you as the enemy and not OCD. So if you want to find that video, it is called, or actually if you go to my website and then the keyword, because the title is Who is Your Child Fighting? Their OCD or You? And that will link you to my YouTube video on that page. And so just search for that. Search for Who is Your Child Fighting? Their OCD or You? On my website at atparentingsurvival.com, and that video will pop up that will show you, and the video is for your child to watch directly. And I talk in that video about, who are you fighting? Do you think your family is your enemy, or do you think that OCD is the thing that you need to crush? And it's easy to say that your family is the enemy, but really they're there to support you. Ultimately, at the end of the day, OCD is coming along with you. And so I kind of I talk about that in that video, so that might help. The last thing that I want to mention regarding this whole topic is that our pace needs to match theirs on some level. And so the more we force, the more we get really vocal and not read the room, the more our child turns into a clam. And so our pacing has to be extra careful in that we are meeting them where they're at. And so if they're only willing to be educated, I'm going to work on just watching, showing them videos. If they don't even want that, then I'm going to have to work up to that and just work on communication and trust and build that, build it from there. I do have a podcast on that. I almost felt bad saying that because I don't want to overwhelm you with all these resources. Let me look it up. Sorry. But a lot of times I say that the first step is building trust and communication. And so if your child is completely unwilling to do anything related to OCD, then we have to working on the trust and communication. And sometimes it's outside of OCD. Like they're not willing to work on anything because the communication and trust isn't there. And so because I say that all the time, eventually I did do a podcast episode on how to build that, because parents will always be like, well, how do I even do that? And I'm like, I don't really have a resource for that. But now I do. It's episode 291, and it's called The First Steps to Progress, Trust, and Communication. And so even if you search my website and put 291 in the search button, it will pop up and you'll be able to watch that as well. I am sorry that I'm throwing you a bunch of resources, but sometimes I want to go deep on different things and I can't do that in one simple podcast. And so I have different resources for different things that you want to learn about. The last thing I want to bring up is when your child is firmly on the brake for a long extended period of time, and no matter what, you're not going to be able to make progress because they are denying it's OCD. They're not wanting to work on it. It's been a while. You are not being able to move the dial in all the other areas that we talked about. The other thing to consider is the SPACE program. So Ellie Leibovitz out of Yale developed a therapy approach called the SPACE treatment approach. And it's about systematically pulling back your accommodations around anxiety and OCD. And with OCD, a lot of times we are part of the compulsion, whether we are providing the reassurance loop that is an OCD reassurance loop, or we are, providing the soap, or we are, wiping things down or doing all sorts of things that OCD wants us to do. We're following OCD's rules. And one approach is to slowly detangle our involvement with OCD. And so Ellie Leibovitz has a book called Breaking Free of Anxiety, Childhood Anxiety and OCD. So you can get the book on Amazon, Breaking Free of Childhood Anxiety and OCD, and he systematically walks you through how to pull back your involvement. It's a whole process. It's a whole therapy process that parents can do on their own. You can get a SPACE trained therapist that works directly with you. And you can go to spacetreatment.net, I believe. Let me double check that for you. Spacetreatment.net. You go to his website, and on the very top of the website, it says providers. You can click there and find a list of people who are trained in the SPACE approach. I also do have an online, on-demand SPACE study guide. And so I walk you through the SPACE program in my language and my style. And so sometimes a lot of parents ask me to do that. So I created it. I actually created it for the AT parenting community because they do actually get access to that for free. Because I created it for them because so many members were like wanting to understand how to do the SPACE program, but they wanted it in my language and in my style of teaching. And so I did make a study guide for them. And then I realized this was really valuable. People really liked it. And so I wound up moving it, and so that people can also just purchase it in my online school, because not everybody wants to become an AT Parenting community member. So you can check that out at ATParentingSurvivalSchool.com. That's my online school of on-demand videos. And so I have courses where I teach you and I teach your kids how to crush anxiety, how to crush OCD, different courses, lots of different courses. One of them is the SPACE Study Guide course. And so you can take that and learn how to pull back your involvement in the OCD. And research around space has shown that just the parent removing themselves from the OCD or the anxiety can be very, very effective and can move the dial just as much as ERP. I think it depends personally on how involved the parent is with the OCD. I think sometimes kids are doing mental compulsions and their compulsions don't involve the parents, and so space really isn't going to move the dial. And other times OCD has hijacked the entire family and space is really going to help. So check out the space resources if you're doing anything that is encouraging or growing or participating in the OCD, and that will help you and support you in slowly pulling back. And that can actually make a huge difference if you are really entangled in the OCD. So I hope that you found this episode helpful. I know it is so hard when our kids reject their OCD diagnosis, and some of it is understanding where that's coming from so that we can slowly and carefully and lovingly show them a different viewpoint, a different story, a different perspective, and move towards progress one small step at a time, which I know can be very, very slow. It can be very slow going, but sometimes it just clicks over time and all of a sudden they get it and they get the support and they want the help, and then things move really quickly when it's their choice and it's their pace. So just keep that in mind as well. I hope you're enjoying the podcast. If you are, don't forget to hit a star and rate it wherever you consume podcasts. You know, I greatly appreciate that. If you write a review, I will be reading yours because I like to share them and pay it forward by letting you know that I got your review and I appreciate it. And so I read them to show my gratitude. I don't think I've gotten any reviews lately. Actually, I haven't. Now that I look at it, it's been a little while. So yeah, actually it's been a little while now that I look at it. So if you've been listening to this podcast for a long time and you've never written a review, I would greatly appreciate it if you took the time to do that. I know a lot of you are longtime listeners, and those reviews are fantastic. They really help other parents realize that there's value in this show. So don't forget to leave a review. I'll be reading yours next time because there haven't been a few in a while. So I appreciate that. Don't forget to find the sparkle in everything you do, and I'll talk to you again next Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.